Welcome to the Healthiest Tech Talks, where we're talking about some of the biggest challenges facing healthcare organizations today and how technology can transform the way we work so that patients receive better care. I'm your host, Natalie Tollefson, Senior Director of Customer Success at Optimum Healthcare IT. Let's dive in. All right. Welcome, everyone, to our latest Healthiest Tech episode. I'm so glad to have you all join us today. I'm Natalie Tollefson here from Optimum. I'm your host. And today I'm very excited because we get to have a special guest, Larry Green, who is Optimum's Principal Advisory Consultant and Executive PMO Strategist. And we're going to have him introduce himself in a second, but we're going to be shaking things up a little bit today and taking a slightly different approach than what we normally do on our Healthy as Tech episodes. Because Larry has such a long career helping health systems and hospitals navigate and mature and build their PMO and their project management strategy, we thought it'd be fun to do a bit of a consulting session live and allow him to share these best practices and practical steps that can help all of you with your own healthcare PMO strategy. So we have been gathering feedback. We've been getting questions from our network and from a lot of you to form the talking points for today. And we're excited about the value that you're going to get from Larry. So this is usually something our consultants would pay for, but we definitely want to be able to drop some knowledge here for you and give you some tools that you can implement right away. So before we jump into the content, Larry, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about your background and maybe a quick personal fact.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Larry Green. I'm a PMO Principal Advisory Consultant here with Optimum Healthcare IT. I help healthcare PMOs drive true value back to their overall organization. I have over 20 years leading PMOs within Fortune 100 companies and top-tier healthcare systems. And I've led business and technology PMOs, so I'm familiar with both sides of the business. So really excited to be here to talk to you today. Fun fact, I would say I enjoy remodeling projects. I just remodeled my daughter's bathroom and repainted this office and looking for the next project to do around the house here. So.
Wow, multi-skilled. That is very impressive. Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you today. So without further ado, let me set the stage a little bit for this conversation. And Larry, I've really enjoyed prepping for this with you and just talking about a lot of the feedback we hear from our clients and what you've experienced in your career. And really, it comes down to the fact that today, health systems are juggling so much, everything at once, it seems, from big digital transformation initiatives like EHR go lives and optimizations, or maybe a cloud migration, AI pilots. That's definitely a relevant topic today, to the plethora of operational projects that occur at an ongoing basis throughout the organization. And there's just so many requests that are coming in and not enough resources usually, and sometimes not a great structured way to prioritize what do we work on next and how do we make sure it's successful. And so that's where we need a very solid PMO strategy. And the reality that I've experienced, at least with my clients, is a lot of them are still maturing in their PMO. Maybe they are a traditional IT PMO and they're looking to expand into more of an enterprise PMO. Or, maybe they're using some legacy tools that are not serving their needs very well, and they really want to be able to optimize with better data. You name it, there's a lot of different parts of the journey that healthcare organizations can be on. So no matter where you're at in your journey, we understand the challenges that you're facing. And what we're going to talk about today is we're going to highlight 5 of those main challenges and dig into them just a little bit. We're probably only scratching the surface, really. But we're hoping that it'll help you really think about how you can move from, call it project chaos in some cases, to real strategic value coming out of your PMO. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive into our first topic, which is concerning project prioritization and strategic alignment. And so just to tee this up, I talk to a lot of customers on a daily basis. Larry, I know that you do as well. And a lot of them struggle with just the intake process, right? How do they navigate and prioritize all of these different ideas and demands and requests that are coming from all angles? And how do they develop a really good system for filtering out those ideas that maybe are not strategic or are not projects, and differentiating between all of that while having to sometimes answer to some of the loudest the loudest voices, right? So Larry, walk us through what advice you would give to a healthcare PMO who is struggling with intake and prioritization. How would you coach them to help them avoid, just saying yes to the loudest voice, or potentially making decisions that are not very strategic for the organization?
Yes, Natalie, you got it. That very clearly is a common challenge we've seen with a number of healthcare organizations. Without clear intake processes, these projects pile up fast and resources can end up getting stretched way too thin. So what I would do is I'd establish a standardized intake and prioritization framework. Prioritization is unique to each individual organization, so it really varies. But overall, I would focus on what is the overall strategy link of this idea to the strategy of the organization or to the individual department. How does this idea relate to regulatory or compliance needs? What is the value that this project is going to bring to the organization or department? And what's your capacity to be able to support it? Those are key aspects that you need to focus on. Second, I would establish portfolio governance. Now, portfolio governance, there really needs to be multiple layers. At the very least, you'd have a department level governance and an executive level governance. The department level governance should be focused on projects that were within their purview. It's impacting their resources. But the second that you have projects that are coming in that impact multiple departments, and given the nature of healthcare organizations having siloed departments, one department can't really speak to the impact to the other. So that's where you need to have the executive level weighing in and saying yes or no to projects that are impacting the overall organization, especially those that are highly strategic, have extreme value, or even capital initiatives. Within those portfolio governance, I would also establish a scoring model so you're having objective decision making. The decisions should be based off of the same criteria I just mentioned, but basically you should have a scoring model within your tools that say, how does this idea relate to the strategy, the roadmap for your team, for your organization? What's the value and return on investment that you're going to get? How quickly will you get that value back? Should I implement this project today, or should I wait a few years because I'm not going to get the value back immediately? What's the risk I'm going to take with this initiative? Risk could be what's the risk of doing the project, but as well as what's the risk if I don't do this project? Am I going to have a compliance violation? Is there a licensing risk? You need to consider those risks as well and make a decision as to what moves forward or not. And then there's capacity. You want to make sure you have resource capacity, and that's just not the people resource. You want to look at, do you have the budget, the financials necessary to pay for this? Do you have the tech environments that are necessary to support this initiative, as well as do you have the subject matter experts and the SMEs, the business and technology experts necessary to deliver the overall delivery for this effort? Once you have that established, you want to make sure that you also have a live dashboard that ties this all together and shows the strategic goals, the mapping, and shows transparency of how these projects that move forward, how they relate to those strategies and the overall scoring. So then the governance team basically has ammo. They have that transparency as to why they said no to some initiatives and yes to others. And that really arms the PMO. I've worked with a number of healthcare organizations, and one in particular, they had a large number of projects. One department had over 500 active projects at a time.
Wow.
And that was pretty significant. There's no way that they could complete them all on time. They were really stretched thin. Projects were going over budget. So we applied this prioritization framework. We were able to limit down that project portfolio down by about 80%. We cut. So from 500, about 100 projects. And within those projects, we put them into individual distinct programs. So about 3 to 4 projects per program, which were the key initiatives that were actually driving success for that organization. And that allowed for them to deliver real value and meet the deliveries on time so that they were able to then reallocate those resources to the work that really mattered. So
That's
ultimately,
yeah.
I would say don't just manage the work you're handed, create a structure that ensures that only the right work gets in the door.
Wow, that's a great example. Just kind of going back to that really quick. The fact that they were able to take that many, what did you say, 500
Yeah, 500.
projects and using this upfront planning and prioritization and like a rationalization process, structure that into larger programs that were more strategic, that tied back to the strategic initiatives of the department or the organization, and you're reducing work at the same time, right? And so that's a really incredible example. And when you were talking through your advice, something came to mind. I obviously talked to a lot of clients, and one of my healthcare clients, we had a conversation about application rationalization, right? So, and obviously for a technology project, but would you say that that factors in significantly into this process as well when it's involving technology? Like, well, what projects or what existing tools can actually be deprecated or replaced or consolidated with whatever this request is?
Exactly. That when you're able to then tie in and map back to the overall strategy, the roadmap for, in this case, technology roadmap, is this project going to enhance a capability or enable new capabilities where you can then centralize resources and centralize your technology into one single solution, maintaining one budget for one vendor instead of trying to spread it across multiple vendors, and you're getting the same capabilities, and it also reduces demand on your technology teams, so they're not having to support multiple technologies, they're supporting one single solution with the same skill set. So that's very important. I hope that answers your question.
It did. Yeah. No, I think it comes up a lot, especially in this age of, there's so many products out there and there's so many vendors and things that are claiming to solve all your problems. And so I think a lot of our PMO and IT organizations within the healthcare community can sometimes have analysis paralysis,
Yes.
like, where do we move forward with, and how do we know, do we build, do we buy, do we consolidate, and it comes up a lot. So I wanted to mention that.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's move on to the next topic, which is, this is a spicy one: resource capacity and planning. This is always a hot topic, let me tell you. And we hear it a lot from our healthcare organizations that struggle between, how do I know if we have capacity for this, and planning for this in the future? We don't know we can't read the future. We don't know what's going to come up and potentially take these resources away. Everyone is stretched thin. They've got their full-time day jobs, but then they're also being asked to participate in a critical project outside of that. And I think there's just nothing more frustrating than, a healthcare worker or a clinician even getting pulled into a project that wasn't really properly planned for, or maybe it's not even that strategic. And so what advice, Larry, would you give to a PMO to help them get a more realistic view of what it actually takes from a resource perspective to execute a project without overcommitting or under committing those valuable resources?
Yes, this is a common challenge. And actually, we just had a meeting on this same topic earlier today. So when the wrong people are pulled into projects, that really results in burnout and delays. It's frustrating for everyone involved and creates a last minute scramble to get all the right people pulled into the project last minute. So what I would recommend is first establishing a realistic capacity view. So you want to know where your resources are, who's allocated to what, and who has availability before you assign new tasks. Having that view then gives you the ability to manage those resources effectively.
Hmm.
The second would be create a skills inventory. You want to know both the primary and secondary skills for these individuals. What can they do? What can your team support? What can't they support? That allows you to identify, do you have a developer who can also function as a project manager on a project? Maybe it's a low risk, low effort project that they would be the best resource for when you don't have enough project managers, or a developer or an architect that can also function as a developer, or maybe even a nurse in the ED that is really great with Epic who would be an awesome subject matter expert on your project for Epic. So knowing those skills and which resources you have to pull from gives you the knowledge and flexibility to flex your project's staffing appropriately.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, interject really quick, the realistic capacity view, that piece of it, I hear a lot of organizations struggle with that because they don't have the data.
Yeah.
They can't actually see who's available and what people are working on, and to be able to plan around. So what would you say to them to get from a place where they're kind of flying blind and maybe they kind of know who they need and how much they need, to actually using the right data to do capacity planning?
Yeah, it's understanding what your resources skills are. So it's asking your teams who has what specializations, especially where there is unique capabilities or unique skill sets that are needed on specific projects. Having that inventory then allows for you to go and measure and determine what's the right resource for what project. And we have specialized tools, such as ServiceNow's SPM project management solution or portfolio management solution has special capabilities that allow you to see from like a heat map which resources, which skill sets are available to support each individual project. So you can then flex them in and out of projects appropriately. You can see who's over allocated, who's under allocated, and then you can even have the ability to basically it gives like a scenario planning capability. So you can identify, are you over allocating in one place? Well, can you move resources temporarily to be able to ease that impact and be able to reallocate them to other projects? And you can play around with the different scenarios without committing them. And it gives you that flexibility with both the heat map scenario planning and overall view of the resources, the skills, and the department level view. You can then plan appropriately for staffing those projects.
Okay. Yeah, I could see how something like a heat map would really help provide sort of that one single view, and just be able to ascertain pretty quickly where to focus your resource planning. So that's a great feature. Just a quick, sidebar on this. One of the biggest pain points I hear is time tracking. So do you have any advice about how to improve time tracking so that resource capacity availability data is actually accurate?
Every organization is different as to how they want to manage their resources and time tracking. With one organization, we had the IT teams that would track their time down to individual task level, and other organizations that would manage their resources to track only at the milestone level. So it really depends on what information you're after or how detailed you want to be. But at the very least, you need to know from each planning, delivery, execution phase, when you're going through each one of those phases, that you know which resources are going to be allocated to that individual phase, and then deciding to what level of detail you want to go from there. With some organizations, their business resources didn't track their time in the system, so we didn't have a view as to what their availability was. We had to just assume. And then there was other situations where we only knew that we only had 2 hours a week to utilize a specific resource. So that's the capacity that we knew. We would only play with not a 40-hour work week with this individual, it would be 2 hours. So having that view and being able to put it into the system and be able to say, okay, here's how I'm going to best utilize this resource versus that resource, gives you a great planning tool so you can plan ahead and make sure you have the right staffing for your projects.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, good. Let's move on to topic number 3. We are just making our way here. This is an interesting one. It has to do with accountability. And I really see this at a much higher, more strategic level of, how can organizations make sure that the projects are executed successfully? And we talk a lot about this with our clients when we talk about things like governance and such. But Larry, what would you say is the leading cause of, stalled projects or abandoned projects, which are really just wasting time and resources? How do you prevent that from happening?
You hit the nail on the head. It is that accountability. So no clear ownership and accountability to make decisions on the project. That's what causes the projects to stall and the projects end up drifting. So really to address this, the easy, simple answer is you need a RACI, or the equivalent of a RACI. Every organization uses something different, but the RACI is basically where you identify who's the responsible party, the accountable, the consulted, and the informed. And it's those first two, responsible and accountable, being very clear as to what your role is on this project or on an individual task, that you're the responsible for delivering it versus the single accountable individual. And that, yes, that should be one person that is ultimately accountable for success or failure of that delivery. And that brings me to the next point, which is you want to make sure you're always assigning a single accountable leader to every project. This leader should be typically at a director level above. This executive has the ability to flex resources within their purview in and out of the project, and they have control and they're able to make key decisions when necessary. Now, that doesn't mean that this director or executive is always on every project meeting and every involved deeply. They don't have to be everywhere. However, when the project team needs them, they need to be available to the project team. When they need a key decision, they need to be accessible and making those key decisions. They need to be that single hand to shake, so to speak, so that they are responsible. Now, there are situations, though, I would say, where it's not appropriate for a single director or VP to make a decision. For instance, in a hospital, because of how siloed they are, you may have a director over the ED that can't make decisions for radiology. That's where you then need to escalate it up a bit. You need to establish a governance committee for these cross-functional projects that impact multiple levels, multiple areas. I'd still recommend the single accountable leader at the project or program level, but then they bring it back to the governance committee, where then the committee can raise those decisions. They can flex their resources, make sure that the project's staffed properly, as well as make sure you're getting the right level of involvement and support for your project. That's basically, I would say, making sure that you have the right support at the get-go.
Well, but Larry, these are healthcare executives, like they're busy people. I even know from my own experience here, just kind of on the consulting side, sometimes it is just extremely challenging to get on these people's calendars. They have very important jobs to do. And so, the reality is what does an organization do? What does a project team do when they simply just don't have the level of engagement that they need from that single accountable leader?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Leaders, especially, they're pulled into last minute fires and they have their attention drawn in all over the organization. So what's necessary, though, is sometimes the project manager needs to raise it up to the PMO, and the PMO may need to re-engage that leader. Make sure that that leader understands their role for the project and how critical these decisions are to make sure the success of the project is for moving forward. If they can't get that engagement, maybe that resource is not going to be available for the next month because of some critical fire that they're addressing, then you may have to adjust the timeline. And if just the timeline still doesn't work, you may need to escalate. And the PMO and the governance teams need to be aware and flexible so that they understand that they may need to flex those timelines to address the availability of the resources. I'll say I've worked on a number of projects where the project manager continued to meet with the team week after week after week, but no decisions were being made, and we were just wasting our time. And in some cases, the developers were building anyway, and we ended up delivering something that didn't really truly meet the need of the business because we couldn't get those key decisions made. So I would highly recommend that you're engaging with those leaders and making sure that they're available, or making changes to the timeline. Now, that leads me to another point, though, that if you're going to impact the schedule, or any of the triple constraints for that matter, so the schedule, the scope, the cost, or overall value, you should be bringing that back to the governance team, to the portfolio governance, making sure they're aware that you're going to be delaying this project or you're not going to get the value, allows them to make key decisions. And that's when the PMO and the governance should be empowered to make the call. Should they call a timeout? Should they stop this project? Maybe we're not going to receive the value we expected, so we should no longer do this initiative. Maybe we're wasting our resources time and they would be better utilized on another project. So we're going to pause this project temporarily to pick up another one, and then we can come revisit this project later. But those teams need to have the ability to say no, stop, so we're not wasting our resources time. And ultimately, what I would say is it all comes down to assigning accountability, having that accountable leader, establishing governance where it's necessary, and then empowering the PMO and governance team to call a timeout. And this is how you prevent stalled projects, you protect those resources, and you ensure value delivery.
Well, and I'm also just thinking about the fact that, to put a period at the end of that sentence, like, we need to be realistic.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to, right?
It does.
Sometimes despite our best intentions, with this highly strategic and valuable project, it may just not be realistic because of those constraints. And
Exactly.
so, or may not be realistic with the current timeline that, has been targeted, or whatever that may be. So that's important. And that's hard. That's really hard sometimes to grasp and like come to terms with the reality of a situation.
Right.
But would you say that the faster you can do that, the more chances you have for success at the end of the day?
Yes, a common term in project management is fail and fail early. So the sooner you know that you're not going to be able to be successful, you need to pump the brakes and stop. Don't continue the madness. The worst thing would be to deliver a solution that no one's going to be interested in, that nobody's going to utilize, or is quickly replaced by some other solution because that was on the roadmap and nobody told you. So knowing early that you're not working on the right work and you can focus your resources elsewhere is key.
Great. Thanks, Larry. That was really beneficial. All right, let's move on to the next topic, which is around tools and processes. So a lot of organizations, obviously at Optimum, we do a lot of technology projects, among other things. And we definitely see our customers struggle with inconsistent project management tools. Maybe their processes, haven't been updated in some time. Or they've lost context, they've lost some tribal knowledge to how things are done. Maybe they're leveraging different methodologies across different departments and teams, and there's just not really a common language. Or using some older archaic tools that don't really deliver the functionality that they need, or like the insights, the data that they need, the automation to help be successful. So Larry, how important would you say it is for there to be standardization across a PMO? And what does that really look like? And where is there room for variation versus maybe standardizing is the best approach?
Yeah, inconsistent tools and processes, that really leads to confusion and it impacts readiness to take on new projects. So standardization is very, very important. However, I would say that standardization, it does not mean every project looks exactly the same. You can't have every project look the same. You can't use the same tool for every project. It's having the right tools in your toolkit so that you can apply them effectively. So you want to have a common foundation. Basically, you want to have common charters, RACIs, intake forms, project plans as an example. They should all be the same. Now, that doesn't mean that for one department versus the other, they can't have additional questions or a unique capability that's built into them, but they have the same content and the same basic framework. So leaders and project team members know where to go to find key information. I would also say project management tools. So those like your SPM for ServiceNow, PlanView, Jira, whatever your project management tool is, needs to be consistent throughout the entire organization. I worked with organizations that had multiple project management tools. Depending on which department you worked in, that's where you would record your project status. And that was very difficult. because team members had to learn different tools depending on what project they were on, and leadership didn't have a holistic view across the organization as to what the status of projects are and what the impacts were on their resources. So it's very important that you have standardization and a central place to house all the information. And
Mhm.
that brings me to making sure that there's good training and adoption as well. So the project management teams, they understand the use of the tools and the why. Why do I need to use this tool? Why is it important? And in what cases can I flex? So there may be situations that you don't need to use a full charter. Maybe you can use a short charter or just a business case. There's situations that maybe under a certain threshold, let's say $5,000. If it's under $5,000, you don't need to put in a financial request form. So knowing what those standards are and having them set and explained throughout the organization helps the project teams know what they need to be successful and ensure that they're using the right tools and methodologies. Now, to the methodologies piece that you mentioned, that is common too. A lot of organizations follow waterfall natively, but they're now moving to agile. And some are saying that they're agile, but they're really waterfall. So it's understanding when to utilize those project management methodologies appropriately. I would say if you got requirements that are fixed, they're not going to change. You have high regulatory compliance needs, and changes will be costly. That's where you would use a waterfall project management methodology. Those are like construction initiatives, infrastructure upgrades. It doesn't make sense for you to build a bathroom over here and then say, no, I don't like it there. I'm going to move it over here. That becomes way too costly and time intensive. So you need to have that waterfall structure. However, there are times when you have a project that the requirements are constantly evolving, speed and adaptability are critical, and the stakeholders are constantly providing additional feedback. So those are where Agile thrive. So you want to be able to leverage the Agile project effectively in those cases. So examples may be software development, marketing campaigns, digital products, and so on. Some organizations are doing what's called hybrid, and hybrid is not using agile tools to run a waterfall project. That's still waterfall, but you're benefiting from agile tools. But hybrid is where you're actually running the project as waterfall for one phase of the project and then moving to agile for a second phase. So a good example would be like you have to deliver software. That software may require additional hardware. So you have to implement those hardware and those that infrastructure change using the waterfall process. And then when you're moving into the software development, you're going to be more agile with your approach and have iterative deliverables. So it's really being flexible and knowing when you can flex. But the goal here, it's not rigidity, it's consistency. So you want to make sure everyone's speaking the same language across the organization. You reduce confusion, and you can speed up onboarding onto new projects. And it really makes it easier to compare and prioritize the work across the organization.
You were taking the words right out of my mouth, I swear. The hot take between agile and waterfall. And we see this all the time. It's like organizations, they say, oh, we want to be agile, like we're an agile organization. But they haven't, I think one thing that I've learned in my career is agile is not just a process. It's not just a methodology. It's actually a mindset.
It is. Yep.
Right. And it is more difficult than people think to adopt that mindset, because you may not have super specific, release dates yet, right? You may not have all of this like preemptive crystal ball type of information, because that defeats the purpose of agile and to an extent. And so I run into that a lot. And I was going to also bring up the hybrid, because, at least here at Optimum, that's actually how we run all of our ServiceNow projects. We use a hybrid methodology for the most part. Sometimes we can lean more agile than others. It depends on the type of the nature of the project. But one thing I tell clients a lot is the reason the hybrid works so well for things like ServiceNow. ServiceNow is a low code platform. Yeah. And a lot of it is workflow, which is process based, right? And processes are not always things that you can change in an agile way, because somebody has to do their jobs differently, and so it's not like pure software development where you're just iterating and building and iterating and building, when there's a major process change, a major behavior change, a major rollout, and there needs to be some kind of a cutover, that's where I see that we benefit from the waterfall aspect of the methodology. But then once you're in the actual the execution of the technical part, that can be a little bit agile, because if we're developing something based on what we heard in a workshop, we're showing it back to that customer and they're like, oh, that's not actually what we thought it was going to be. Can we like tweak that a little bit? You have the opportunity to do that, but it's also configuration. It's not necessarily, software development in its purest form. And so I hope that makes sense, but it's just, we see this all the time. And it's important, again, to be realistic, right? Does this project require, what's going to be the best format for the project, given the tools, given the mindset we have and the expectations?
Yeah, exactly. And ServiceNow makes it really easy because it's very highly configurable, and you can tailor each form to what the needs are for each individual client or department. So it is really great in that aspect, whereas other tools are, you have to really highly customize it in order to get what you need for each individual team. So yeah, I agree.
Thank you. That was great. Such hot topics here. Okay, last one. Topic number 6 is really around execution and tracking performance. One of the things we hear a lot from healthcare organizations is that their leaders are lacking that real-time visibility into the performance of a project. And so how do they represent that information at the board meeting or at the executive meetings? How do they really know if that data is accurate and what might be holding up the project or contributing to risks or issues or things of that nature? So, Larry, what suggestions do you have for healthcare leaders? And again, I'm really thinking about the executives, right, who need that data. How should they be measuring? How can PMO help to measure projects more effectively for the leadership?
Wow. For this one, I could probably have a webinar on this topic all by itself. A lack of real-time visibility really could allow projects to drift off course, and executives need to have that view. So I'll share some ideas, but every organization is unique and has their own needs and expectations for what they should be looking at. For one, I would say you need to have a good project management tool that provides real-time dashboards where you can have a view over the overall portfolio and see what's going on. The portfolio views, they typically would have like, what's the overall health of the portfolio itself and the programs and projects within it, which projects are in danger and which ones need support to move them forward. What's your capacity impact? Do you have a lot of people sitting around with no work to do, or do you have resources over allocated? Mostly it's the latter. But are your resources over allocated, and you may need to stop some work in order to make sure that projects are moving forward successfully? And then what's in the demand funnel? Are you working on projects right now that there's a demand out there that's going to completely undo everything you just built? So we need to understand what's out there so that you can then flex your resources and make sure you're working on the most meaningful projects at the right time. Now that's at the portfolio level. I would say at the project and program level, leaders need to have a view of the overall milestones and where the projects and programs are leading towards those milestones. Are they on track? What are the risks that they're facing? Are they going to face some challenges and issues that the leadership team needs to make sure they're mitigated and that they need to step in at perfect times? And are they going to get the benefit that they originally expected? Are you finding that you're not actually going to get the value out of this project that you originally thought? So should you continue to move forward? And cost, financials. You've got to look at the financials. Are you going to overspend? And what happens if you do? Do you have an extra bucket? I don't know any organization that, oh, I have a few $1,000,000 sitting over here that I can just tap into if I go over, so it's fine. So you want to make sure that the cost is being managed carefully and that you have those resources. Now, in some situations, maybe you're underspending and you have the resources available to reallocate funds to other projects even. So having that view is critical to an executive. I would also share that more mature PMOs, they should have a view of like inter-project dependencies as an example, where you can see that these two projects are needed before I can start another one. I need a certain capability in place before I can start this
Mhm.
other, or before I can implement and go live with this other functionality. Or these three projects together are impacting the same department at the same time. And maybe that's a good thing, or maybe that's a bad thing. And so you don't want to have that major impact. So you may need to just spread out that implementation.
I have
The
a
other,
great example of that, by the
yeah,
way,
yeah,
because
please.
it comes up all the time. When healthcare organizations are implementing an ERP, which is a long journey, from start to finish, it could be 18 months to a couple of years. But then they're also looking at some case management and service delivery tools like ServiceNow. And so there's an analysis that happens there. And I mention it specifically because it literally does come up all the time. um, if you're going to be bringing your HR, finance, and supply chain folks onto a new ERP, which is in most cases today, it's a cloud-based platform, then, well, how are you going to support that platform once it's live? How are you going to intake different requests or support the rollout of that? Oh, well, we should probably have some kind of a case management or service delivery support mechanism set up and vetted before it goes live,
Yep,
so that
exactly.
we're not reactive to, oh, now we have this, multi-million-dollar platform ERP that's going live, and we didn't really think about how we're going to support that and be able to be agile, right? Or be able to be very quick in optimizing and fixing things. And so it's things like that where if they're going to invest in a platform like ServiceNow, for example, but then also into a major ERP or even an EHR like Epic, it's the same topic, right? How are you going to support it once it's live? That's a project dependency that needs to be taken into account.
Yeah, absolutely. And you not just what's the impact to the organization, but you want to look at the negative impacts, but there's also value impacts. And so I would also add, leaders need to have a view into the overall value. Too often PMOs, they implement the project and then they move on to the next one. And that's in your rearview mirror. You don't need to look at it again.
Mm.
No, PMOs should always be looking at the value that was delivered from that last project. Are they achieving that value? And if they're not, why not? What can we learn from that, from the lessons learned? Not just through the implementation, but did we take on the right effort? Did we overcommit? Did we think we were getting something that we actually weren't? And how can we apply that back to governance so that we make sure that that mistake doesn't happen again in the future? I would also add, it's great having all this information. It's data overload in some cases, but you need to make sure that the leaders and the governance teams are utilizing the information. So if you have a project that's at risk, you may need to slow down other projects. You may need to slow down that project. If you're finding no value is being achieved for this project, maybe you need to stop the initiative and move on to something new or something better. And then if you find out that you have strong value, you're going to get the immediate payback on this initiative. Maybe you want to accelerate that initiative. Maybe you want to stop resources on one project, put them all on this one so you can get that payback immediately, and making sure that you're getting immediate payback to the organization. So I would say you really want to make sure that leaders have the right data to make key decisions.
Mhm.
But don't just report to history. You want to build a system where the data, the leadership, the governance, they all work together in real time to deliver projects successfully with true value back to the organization.
That's really good. Reading between the lines, the other thing I'm hearing, Larry, is it's about discipline,
It is.
disciplining yourself as an organization when you have that go live milestone, to not just, oh man, that was traumatic, let's move on. I never want to think about that project again. It's like, no, we got to think about that and
Yeah,
discipline ourselves to measure the value and the impact of that so we can learn from it.
exactly.
Well, that was Incredible. Thank you, Larry. So much information. I mean, we could probably talk for hours upon hours, dig deeper into so many of those topics. So we are going to wrap it up at this time. Thank you, Larry, for taking your time. These are some of the biggest issues that healthcare PMOs are dealing with. And so if you're listening, thank you for staying on and just listening to a lot of this advice. If you have, questions for us, or maybe this was a lot of information and you're like, whoa, where do I start? Or I want to dig into that one topic that we just scratched the surface on, or you have a list of questions, Larry is offering free 30-minute follow-up consultations. We're going to go ahead and drop his email address in the chat here. And please don't spam that to everybody, but definitely leverage that if you want to dig deeper into one of these topics. And that's his personal email address here at Optimum. And then we're happy to have a follow-up conversation. So thank you, everyone, for joining another great Healthy as Tech Talk. We look forward to sharing more conversations about how to move your healthcare organization forward. It's about the mission, right? It's our providers, it's our patients, and all of our healthcare staff. That's why we are all here. So thank you and have a great rest of your day.